Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us. We are going to talk about a very important point, two indeed. First of all, the key market, China, and second point will be about how local culture impact the adoption of circular economy. To address this topic and make sure that you can address it in your business for the Chinese market in a proper way, I invite on stage an amazing speaker. Please, Jonathan SIBONI, join me. And Jonathan is actually the founder and CEO of Luxurynsight.
Thank you.
And because Reluxury event is an international event, we are extremely pleased to have with us tonight Dominique, CEO of Rethink Fashion, and Dominique is currently in Shanghai. Am I right?
Yes, I am.
Amazing.
Friday evening in Shanghai. Good afternoon, everyone.
So,
Hi, John.
please, guys, the floor is yours, and I'll let you discuss about your vision about the way we should tackle circular economy in the Chinese market.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you today. So we have 47 minutes to talk about 1.4 billion people and the future of the world. It's going to be an easy task. But before anything, it's already quite late for you, Dominique. So I would like to share with you the first question. How do you see China tackles with these overall, I would say, sustainable transformation? What's your view on that from China?
Now, as you say, obviously, look, with 1.2, 1.4 billion people, obviously it's a huge country, very complicated environment. And as most likely most of you know today, we're still struggling with a zero COVID strategy that's taking a lot of time for everyone. Nevertheless, I think definitely the leadership in China recognizes, and they have for a while, issues related to the climate crisis and environmental degradation from the development of the past 40 years. So there's no doubt that they are very clear about it. And definitely as well, they are aware that it could bring political instability, or it could also stop economic prosperity. I think they're very clear about this. They always look very long term in that sense. And because, and again, I mean, today, all of you, I'm sure, are aware China is obviously a leading polluter today. When they look into fashion, for example, maybe we're throwing away 26 million tons of clothes yearly. E-commerce is unique in China, has made our life so simple, where even at this time, it's 11 o'clock tonight, I could order something online and I may receive it in 20 minutes. And nevertheless, that brings 40 million tons of packaging a year just to e-commerce, right? So there's no doubt that China's got an issue. Nevertheless, there are strong measures being taken. If you just look over the years, John, I mean, you've lived here and you have come on a regular basis. I mean, air quality has improved, I mean, drastically, right? I mean, if you remember early 2000, where you could really question of deciding to stay here or not. And many people were leaving Beijing, for example, because of it, because it was much worse, for example, than Shanghai. We are well equipped now at home with air purifier, although today, do I still need them? I think there's been such an amazing improvement. In some case, you could argue that the problem has moved to somewhere else in China. Nevertheless, I think overall the biggest picture, there's been drastic decision in order to improve it. And when it comes closely to climate change, President Xi in 2020, and this is today widely known in China, right? He said that China would reach carbon peak around 2030, and they were aiming for carbon neutrality from 2060. So again, you could say, again, China is making it a little different. For some reason, they're not following what most of the West is aiming to do. Nevertheless, if you need to bet on a country that's going to reach its target, I would probably bet on China. Right? The process may be a little rough, and most likely it will have to be. Nevertheless, look, I mean, there's many major Western economy you already know they're not going to reach their target, right? So it's a very different way, I think, to set up targets. But definitely, China is a leader in electric vehicle, for example, right? I mean, just stand in a corner in the city in Shanghai, and a big share of the cars are electric. You've got the share bike. I mean, bikes are back in trends. I mean, like 20 years ago, there were almost only bikes in China, and suddenly there were no bikes anymore. Now there are bikes all over through the shared system, and with renewable energy as well. I mean, China is obviously clearly a leader in the field as well. So in the end, they will not do it the way the West is aiming to do its transition. Nevertheless, their chance to succeed is really there. Sorry, I think you wanted to add something.
So China is in the process, a process of sustainabilization, if I may. But what would you say about the circular economy, in particular with regards to fashion and luxury, which is what brings us here now? I may share with you a couple of ideas later on, but I'd be happy to hear about your thoughts as well.
But look, I mean, I think the pandemic has wakened people a bit like we see everywhere. And so suddenly there's a bit of focus more on health, well-being, and I think the realization that just consuming to consume is not as cool as it was, right? And I think we see it also in big urban centers. So there's definitely part of this reduction, which in a way is definitely the first step to apply. When it comes to the reuse or like the second-hand market that has obviously been huge in the West for years, in China, we're just at the beginning. Nevertheless, it's amazing how, especially the Gen Z, but even millennials are really open to that, right? In most cases, most people have never really bought second-hand clothes, but suddenly you see such stores opening in major cities, such in Shanghai. You see them as trendy spots, and this is something that not long ago you would never see because it was seen as poverty, right? Or somebody who couldn't afford, or even like not hygienic, basically, right? People would think actually by wearing a second-hand pair of jeans, no, I could get sick out of this, right? So all of this is really new. I mean, again, this is new way of doing things that are just coming into China. If you look then into repair, I think increasingly we're encouraging it. Like especially if you've got quality products, why don't you just try to fix them? I'm encouraging. I mean, increasingly now you have brands doing more innovative strategy of all type initiatives to reach out to consumers. And for example, I could easily see like a leading bag company, for example, setting up a booth somewhere in town, maybe jointly with some of the local guys who have been fixing things forever, but with also like, top guys from Europe who would be working with them to fixing maybe on an initiative on anybody, whatever they bring to them, right? I think that this is going there for sure. But then again, China is a huge country with consumers that are extremely different, right? In education background level, in income level, obviously. And so consequently, it's really hard to pinpoint where the consumer are. And obviously, I think currently the level of knowledge on sustainability is still behind. And for example, when you look into the life product cycle, to most people, it would probably mean, it's how long can I use the product instead of looking into what has been the impact to be made, right? So, I think I see your hand flashing. I think you want to add something.
No, sure. I'm listening. What you're saying makes me think of I would say one question and one remark. First, for the remark side, I think when we talk about the cultural aspect and the cultural integration of these elements, such as circularity, luxury is cultural by definition, right? Because everywhere in the world we have different definition of luxury. Luxury is about things that people don't need. Needs are universal.
Yep.
Everybody in the world needs the same thing. But however, luxury is probably more about desires, and desires are social cultural. Now, that being said, I think there's some sort of a misconception regarding second-hand or circular economy in luxury in a way that maybe, and that's a question and a remark, there are three different markets. The first one is the second-hand, the pure second-hand that we know, which is selling products that are 2, 3, 4, 5 year old, and that's it. The second market, which is very different, is vintage. It's products that are 20, 30, 40 year old that may cost even more than new products. And the third market is what we used to call the gray market, which is products that are new but available through secondhand because the people cannot buy it new, right? Like the Birkin or some beautiful Swiss watches. Now these three markets are put together in secondhand because you can buy, a new product in secondhand, a real secondhand or vintage. And I think that's what makes a lot of misunderstanding or misconception in this market in particular, because you cannot compare a product that is extremely rare from 50 years ago and a product that is new that cannot be accessed. Now, as long as we put that in the same box, nobody will understand the market. And that's a little bit where we stand. Now, talking about that and linking to China, I think that there's a big difference between China and here, because we're going to talk a little bit about the differences as well. One of the big differences of China, and one of the reasons why Chinese used to come to Europe 15 years ago, was authenticity. Because they knew by coming to Europe to buy, they would buy authentic products. There's a big risk or cautiousness about fakes, less now than before, obviously, because the brands have developed amazing distribution network, but however still exists. And that's particularly true for secondhand, because when you buy secondhand, you don't buy from the brand, you buy from a consumer. So you can have a bigger risk or skepticism about the authenticity of the product. And that
Totally.
still is a real challenge in China, and one of the reasons why consumers don't really jump on the market right away, because as long as the brands don't get too involved in being this kind of neutrality stamp, it's going to be a problem. The first part, the gray market, exists hugely. I mean, the Daigou, I've been here forever. This kind of secondhand exists. If you go to even Instagram and you buy Birkin or Kelly, you're gonna find what we could consider secondhand, but it's products that are new and sold via this market. And vintage is something that is a little bit too recent for China yet. So actually, I think there's a different kind of speed for these markets, with the central question of authenticity in engaging the clients. How do you think and how do you see the market could evolve in the coming year if luxury was to embark on this journey of circularity in China? What could be done? Because I know you work on that on a daily basis.
No, but you're totally right. The right point. I think trust in general in society is harder to gain, I think, compared to most of Western society, where I would say often in China, you don't trust until you're sure you can trust, right? And definitely, if you're not, because even if we buy it within the store, I mean, like probably not anymore, but 15, 20 years ago, there were scandals that even within the store, they were sometimes selling fake ones. There's been scandal like that, right? So obviously, if you don't buy it from the actual store, I mean, why would you believe in any way that is a real one? And this is where transparency and traceability will be the solution, right? And this is something I think that in the West is becoming a bit more common, implemented, while in China we're really just at the beginning. I think you've got brands, and not only in luxury, but in fashion in general, that are looking into trace their product, obviously understand their impact, but also aiming at sharing the information, the data with their consumers. And consequently, if you've got, premium second hand, you'll be able at least to confirm to the potential buyer that, look, this is actually an actual product. I think there's a huge market for that. Any solution provider that are right now in Europe interested in coming to China to cover that subject, I think there's amazing opportunity because I do believe there's not that many local players specifically working on fashion luxury products in that field.
And if I may, I think, like considering number one, that the Chinese luxury market is becoming more and more challenging in a way because less people travel, there's local challenges that we all know. B, the market has grown tremendously over the past few years, which brings to a huge amount of products being in China currently. And C, this kind of speed in China, which cannot be compared to what we see here. I mean, China is much quicker than what we see here. So there's probably a huge volume of products, luxury products out there that are just waiting to be put back to the market and be replaced by new ones,
Totally.
right? Now, that being said,
I think, go ahead.
that being said, don't you think there's a risk from the brands to be left behind in this dynamic? Because if the brands don't kind of onboard this circular economy, then the local platform, C2C platform, will just move on and seize the opportunity, as it's already the case. I mean, there's already even retail in China, not only digital platforms, but second-hand retail stores in second, third-tier cities which are full of Gucci and Prada bags. So isn't there a risk for the brands to kind of lose this control and the consumer relationship, in particular in China, because it's a little bit far away and there's a huge volume of products?
No, but yeah. I mean, obviously there's a risk, but I would say I think they need to realize that if you cannot beat them, join them. So I think the brand maybe should be leading such initiative in a sense, right? Because I think when I got online about half an hour ago, I think that was a bit of the subject of, look, in the end, there's a lot of wealth just hanging in people's wardrobe and apartment, right? And especially China being such a gifting society, right? There's a bunch of bags, for example, were given, and maybe you're not so much into them, but you'll keep them because they're luxury products. And consequently, it should open plenty of opportunities. For example, is there rental, right, that could be made of it? I mean, there's a bit of rental business in China nowadays, but it's not really consumer to consumer. It's mostly an organization that rents out. And so I think there's definitely opportunities. And in the end, maybe it makes sense for the brand to lead such an effort because it's going to add also a level of trust that we were talking about earlier. But again, it's like, who is going to be the first one to jump on this? I don't think we have seen this yet in China, but I think there's going to be somebody who's going to definitely give it a try.
And what you're saying makes me think of something that we hear a lot. Luxury has, there's an interesting trend in luxury, which is that luxury brands have grown from artisan, because Louis Vuitton was an artisan, Hermes was, a craftsman, okay? So from being an artisan to wholesaler, because they would sell just a couple of pieces they would made by hand, and then they would have wholesaler, to later on retailers and open their own stores and, expand all around the world, to e-tailers and open their digital shops decades later. And now the question everyone's asking around is, are they going to become resellers? Because that seems like a logical next step for them to recreate this circle and go back into the circular economy. At the same time, if that seems obvious and the trend is here, and we all know and support that trend, if I may, I think there's quite a big difference in these different steps versus this one. In particular, with regards to the e-commerce. E-commerce in China is huge. I mean, the digital retail is 53% of retail in China, whereas here during COVID, it was even 13% at the peak of what we got. So digital is everywhere in China. But digital retail for luxury was still, in a way, B2C or B2B2C. You would sell to consumers, or you would sell to Farfetch, who would sell to consumers, but it's still B2B in a way. Now, with regards to second-hand, it's going to be either C2C or C2B2C, which means that in the end, it will start from the consumer, which is a huge challenge because dealing with 500 stores is a thing. Dealing with 5,000 retailers is a challenge. Dealing with 5 million consumers who can potentially be resellers seems like a big one. And I think that's a new thing that the brands are not so used to tackle, especially because in luxury, we are more in an offer business than a demand-driven business. And for a lot of segments, such as watches or wine and spirits, brands barely know their consumers. And some even never met the consumer. Rolex doesn't have a store in the world. They sell via retailers. They don't know their final consumers. Hennessy doesn't have a store in the world. Hennessy never met a consumer. So how do you recreate this relation with final consumers? Maybe secondhand could help, but at the same time becomes a challenge. Now, I see China as a place of creativity, innovation, and different perspective. So don't you think that China, in a way, because it's different, because consumers are very powerful, because digital is everywhere, could also serve as either pilot or inspiration or test for certain of these attempts of developing second-hand?
Definitely, like often in Europe, people may know that allocation comes from here nowadays, and I wouldn't be surprised as a place to test something like this. But while you were talking also, the resale business in China, I believe, has to be very different from in the West. Why? Often the argument in the West, you would say, yes, I mean, your younger consumer cannot afford yet a certain product. So let's encourage and sell him cheaper a second-hand product. And that gives the chance to gain that consumer. He gets to know the brand. And progressively, when he can afford the full price, he may buy the full price. Well, in China, the younger consumers are already paying the full price without any problem, right? And so, I mean, how much younger can you go down? I mean, really? And so then, or you really reach out to people who may never be able, for example, to afford the full price. Or they really do it for a sustainability purpose. But look, I mean, there's still a way to go, right? I mean, in fall, October, November is obviously a good time to do outside activities in China, and you have a lot of green markets popping up here and there. And obviously the crowd that you see there, I mean, it would be very similar, I think, to a similar crowd in a similar event in the West. Nevertheless, again, China is big, and as soon as you get out of certain area, they've got no clue about the concept yet, right? So,
and just for the sake of debate, because we are French, so we like to always say black when you say white and white when you say black. So, just for the sake of
I'm not the one.
yeah, okay. So just for the sake of debate, it's true that secondhand probably will not be a way for consumers to access luxury in China, luxury that they could not afford, because as you clearly mentioned, 69% of luxury consumers are already young consumers. They are millennials and Gen Z, so they're already, not everyone of course, but a lot of young consumers are already luxury buyers. So that may not be the reason. Sustainability, let's be hopeful, but I'm not even sure it's going to be the reason. But what if there's a third way, which is to say, when you already have 50 pairs of shoes, maybe the only way to sell them a 51 is to let them resell a 10 or 20, right? Which is not because they cannot afford it, not because they want to save the world, but just because at a certain time, if you already have an iPhone and you want to sell a new iPhone, the only way is for you to get back the old iPhone, so that you get into this dynamic of recreating and changing. And this is what happened in the car industry. The reason why the car makers accepted to move to secondhand is just for people to buy new ones, because they knew that the only way for them to sell a new one was to get the old car. Otherwise, you would just have two cars, and you don't want two cars, right? But the brands didn't want to do that, because when you're Renault or Porsche, you want to sell a new one. You don't want an old one. So maybe, just maybe, won't there be some sort of an obligation, okay, to go down that road, which of course will be presented as a good thing in sustainability and saving the world, but just to continue to grow a market that has already grown so much, that we need now to help people buy new thing and create some circularity. Is that what you feel in China? People have so much product that the brands may have to resort to that. If you have, women having 50 bags or men having 50 watches, there's no discrimination there. Isn't this possible as well?
Yeah, no, I guess you're right. I guess that could go that way too. I guess, but also I think somehow, while in the West the impact may not be as big, here in China, the government in a way is part of all that transition, involved so much more than in the West in a sense. And so whatever the government sees in that, right, they may definitely be pushing a certain behavior. And so if brands were able to get aligned their strategy with where the government is going, that may then be able to grow the way you say.
Okay, and one thing that is of particular interest for me is this cultural aspect, because dealing with China, I used to live in China as well, and dealing with China is also about having this kind of duplicity in your mind where you think a certain way and you try to adapt constantly. Do you think because of China's culture and because of China's current dynamics, positive or negative doesn't matter, there will be more particular opportunities for luxury fashion beauty brands to expand in circular economy now, beside the government? I'm just talking about cultural elements and for example, it's a bad example, but it's just to leave you all the good ones for you. Chinese are discount fighters, okay? They're bargain hunters. Americans are bargain hunters. When they find a good deal, no matter if they're a millionaire or billionaire, they're going to jump on it. French are not always bargain hunters, okay? Some people, that just don't have it. That's not their culture. But because Chinese are extremely good at, optimizing and discount, and 11/11 is coming in a week, right? So won't there be something cultural there to say, at this 11/11, give me back your old products, buy new ones, and create something? What's your view on that with regards to the Chinese cultural specificity and the potential opportunity? I think I just killed you. Try not to speak about politics too much, because then your connection gets broken. Yes, we cannot hear you so well. Maybe you can try to disconnect and reconnect and not talk about politics anymore. So while I'm walking on the stage, I'm going to tell you about when I grew up. So no, we just lost him. He's going to be back. But indeed, I think there's something with regards to culture in secondhand, because before COVID, secondhand could have been seen in certain places, not everywhere, as a sort of shame. Not everywhere, obviously, but the fact to say, I buy secondhand because I cannot afford to buy a new one. And some people could get ashamed of that and say, no, I prefer to buy a brand that is a little bit cheaper than to buy a secondhand of a top brand. That, of course, has changed tremendously over the past few years, but it's something that could have taken a generation to change, because now it's something that is positive. To say, it's not second-hand, because second is not as good as first. This is psychological. The same way, language structures your mind and your spirit. That's why culture is so important. But when we say second-hand, somewhere it's not as good as first-hand. When we say offline, off is less good than online. So it's been structured in a way that digital grew so big. Now we think offline is not as good as online. While, sorry to say, but offline is also in life. It's quite cool. So there's something about culture and the way to engage with these changes. And I think now that a lot of people talk about secondhand and call it pre-loved. and one of them in particular being Stanislas Zekersis, who will be give us the honor to close, I think, the forum in a couple of days. And Stanislas says, or talks a lot about pre-loved, and I find this idea quite interesting to say that we all live in a world that is pre-loved, right? Earth is pre-loved. A lot of us live in houses that are pre-loved because we live in apartments that were occupied before by other people. We may even drive a car that is pre-loved. We may even love somebody who's pre-loved, right? By their parents to begin with, and then, we're French, so we're creative. But then it doesn't make any difference in a way, and doesn't prevent you to love and recreate something. So there's a difference in dynamic somehow about the business, and saying that instead of saying it's negative, it becomes positive or even necessary, because I like this idea of necessity, because luxury cannot continue to grow and sell 5 series of shoes every year, no matter what, just because at a certain stage you will have a lot of shoes, right? But that's a problem and a challenge for the brands. The question of how is another question. Do you have any hopes that he's going to be back? Not sure, right? Don't worry, yes.
Please finish your...
you know me, I could talk for 5 days. But maybe you can be the moderator now if you want. Or you could all be moderators.
Yeah, that's my
maybe
point.
we can take some questions from the room, right?
Okay. That's the point. Do you have any questions?
Any question about China,
Jonathan?
circularity, or internet connection? Yes.
Thank you so much for your excellent speak. I really liked it. And, Chinese origin. I lived in Switzerland for more than 20 years. And of course, I think I really understand what's the difference or what's the importance about language, culture, and everything you're talking about between China and Europe, and especially West Europe. And also, as you mentioned, now the e-commerce, the digital market and everything grows so fast in China. And, in China, they have different digital channels. And one of those is called live stream. So I'm wondering, and I want to know your opinion, for example, for the European or Swiss European fashion companies, when they go to China market, don't you think it's a lot of risk to work with some live stream influencers or with a live stream? And because, as you mentioned, that Double 11, this kind of festival, whatever, it really can help them to sell a lot. And these influencers also can give a great contribution. So what's the risk from your point of view, and what is your advice, for example, for the Swiss and European fashion companies when they go to a Chinese digital market? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think there's 2 levels of thoughts behind your very good question and very central one. The first one is maybe related to the evolution of digital. Luxury didn't really want to engage with digital 20 years ago because luxury is a successful business. So when something works, you don't want to change. That's just the way it is. Look at Switzerland. So the start of the digitization of luxury was via distribution. Yoox, Net-a-Porter, and the brands didn't want to go there because they said, no, we have beautiful stores, they're amazing, you have to come and visit us. Some of you are experts of this store, so come to our stores, they're beautiful, don't go online. But then because the brands didn't want to do it, other people did. Yoox, Net-a-Porter, and so on. The next step was communication. Brands said with social media, you cannot talk to people. But brands said, no. Coco Chanel doesn't talk. Or first, she's not here anymore, so, But some people said, yeah, I can do it, and these are the influencers. And they took the stage and the space to speak. Now, because these people were able, number 1, to sell digitally, and number 2, to communicate digitally, they became very dangerous because they could also create their brands. And that's what happened with Kylie Cosmetics and others that say, if I have the channel to talk and the channel to sell, why do I need to wait for brands to pay me? I can create my brand. And then that became very dangerous because you created monsters or competitors. So that's the logic behind. Now, applied to China, which is the same logic somehow, that these influencers are people that are able to communicate about the brand, but also sell the brands. Of course, there's an opportunity on the sales perspective, but there's a risk as well, because you mentioned the very important live streamers. If you look about Via or Jasly and so on, these people are extremely powerful. However, they do one different live stream every 20 minutes. So they're going to do one for your brand, and 20 minutes they're going to do one for another brand, they're going to do one for another brand. But there's nothing new here. In France, we had Pierre Bellemare 25 years ago. He was doing the teleshopping. And these guys are doing the teleshopping in 2022. That's what they do. But the thing is, people now want more authenticity. They want more relation. The world needs relation. It's easier to connect to your human being than a brand of somebody who died 100 years ago. So that's what influencers tap into. And they're very good at that, because it's easier to talk and listen to a real person than talk to a brand or the CEO who's not going to do a live streaming. Although, in China, the CEOs do live streaming. And if you take a couple of brands like Cartier, Guillaume Alix, CEO of Cartier in China, did live streaming. Mathieu for Piaget also. So now we touch to a second point. So there's a risk, but there's something logic there. So we need to find a new way to speak and engage with consumers. Now, at the same time, I think there's something very specific that we're touching here and very important for the future. We all made our peace with the fact that you cannot separate anymore online and offline retail. At the beginning, we thought, or some people thought they could. They would have people in charge of the stores and some people for e-commerce. That's long dead, and we call omnichannel. But China is bringing something new. China shows us that tomorrow you also won't be able to distinguish communication and distribution. And that's something very new. And very, very challenging as well, because you have a head of communication with a budget and you have a head of sales. Now, if you look about WeChat, WeChat is a communication platform. You communicate, but you can also sell via WeChat, right? Xiaohongshu, Little Red Book, is also a communication platform. You show, but you sell. Douyin, TikTok, also is a communication platform, but you can sell. So now that these links between communication and distribution are impossible to de-link, how do you work as a company? How do you measure the return on investment when you do a campaign on WeChat? It's very complicated. So because they don't know really how to do, they prefer now to just say, okay, let's give it to a third party, an influencer. I know how much I pay him. I know how much money I make. It's easy to measure. It's not a good way, but at least I can do. Because if I do on my own and I pay a campaign that may or may not lead to transformation, another one who brings to store, but it's sold online, it's very hard to measure. So I would say this is the way to go. There's a risk, especially when you work with people who work with everybody. And at the same time, this is where the market is today. So I would say instead of working with these people and fight to work with these guys, the brand should recreate a way to use live streaming. And I'm going to give you an example. During the COVID, a lot of brands we work with in China have set up live streaming studio in their stores, so that you could not go to the store, but you could call your personal assistant, and then they would be in the shop, show you, and do a live streaming for you and say, I think you may like that. What about this? What about that? The consumer would often put the camera off because they were sleeping on the bed, but they would see the product and may engage. So there are new ways to engage. And I see that Stephanie is looking at me because I've been speaking for 24 minutes. Yes. Another question, maybe.
Maybe another question, but I also would like to take a few minutes for you to explain what you do at Luxurynsight, because I think it's very interesting. But we can take another question, but 2 minutes to answer if you don't mind, because we're running out of time, and I really would like you to explain what you do at Luxurynsight. Sure. Please ask.
Okay, it's actually 2 questions, but I hope you don't kill me. No, the first question is, so today throughout all the conferences, we talked about a lot of solutions to be more sustainable in luxury and fashion. There was one that was never mentioned, is the most unconventional, but I think it has potential, which is virtual clothing and virtual fashion. So basically fashion for pictures and photographs and videos. So linking to digitalization in China, do you think this is going to be part of the future as well, or it doesn't have a future? And then the second question is, a bit more general, do you think that, like we talked about secondhand in China from current luxury brands, do you think that part of the future will also be Chinese luxury brands? Thanks.
Welcome. So, okay, to answer your questions briefly, the first question about digital world, virtual world, metaverse, and so on. There's a particularity in China, which is the high risk seen by the government about the metaverse and virtual world, and it's been seen very recently with Tencent, which is the biggest, digital company in China, closing all its NFT and metaverse activities because of risk, potential risk with the governments and so on. So there's a big question related to regulation. Because Web3 is about deregulation. Web3 is about saying money doesn't belong to government, but to the blockchain, and power and data and blah, blah. So, but China has a different vision about that, which is very controlled. So the question that you ask, which is a very important one, depends on will everybody in China go to virtual reality or not. If everybody go, then yes, there's a market. If nobody goes, then no, there won't be a market. And that's more, I would say, an administrative question. Now, the second question, and Dominique arrives at the perfect time because I would be very happy to hear about his views on that too. The question that has been asked was, we're talking a lot about circularity for Western luxury brands and so on, but do we believe there will be such thing as a Chinese luxury brand in the future? So just to give my short, quick idea, and I know Dominique is an expert on that matter, yes, there will be very powerful Chinese brands in the future. And guess what? There already are some very powerful Chinese brands. But the thing, and I started with that, is that luxury is about culture. Luxury is about selling culture. We sell our culture with Hermès. We sell our culture by selling wine because we drink wine. But in China, they sell tea for much more expensive than our Bordeaux. It's just that the difference is we managed to sell our culture and make it universal so that everybody in the world would enjoy having Hermès Vuitton or drink Bordeaux, whereas the Chinese tea is not drunk universally in the world and therefore less famous and less internationalized, which raises the question of saying, even if it's very powerful and very successful and very expensive, is it luxury if it's not universal? And I'm going to give you a last example, which is Mao Tai. Mao Tai is alcohol base of rice. Mao Tai is, so here we consider the NC or Moet are luxury brands because everybody in the world drinks NC. But Mao Tai is a Chinese alcohol. The market capitalization is twice of Hermès. And they only sell alcohol made out of rice, right? One bottle could cost 2,000 euros. Is it luxury? Well, for me it could be. But is it luxury brand in our system? Maybe not, because it's not universal. So there's a question of culture with that as well. And I think it's good also to think that our culture is not the only one, and therefore our luxury products are maybe not the only one. Maybe Dominique, you have a view on that.
Yeah, Dominique, I'm very pleased that you're back, and I would like you to end this amazing discussion with few words, because we are running out of time, and I would like you to, close this amazing discussion.
No, I'm glad to be back. Wasn't easy, but I'm here. No, but just to add on what John was saying, in a way, I mean, you can compare China to the US sometimes, right? They are extremely big market, and in a sense, you don't need to go out as maybe European needs to do in order to sell your product. In that sense, as we say, maybe there's some luxury brand in China that will just remain in China within the greater China world. And that's going to be enough because they know how to appreciate it, right? And I think tea is a good example. Mao Tai is also a very good example. But when it comes to fashion, you do start to have some premium brands, right? Icicle could be one actually that has open stores in Europe already. And when you are in contact with Icicle, the team, the operation, a lot of what they do, the events, I mean, you do feel that it has a certain level already that could be comparable to some Western brand. Nevertheless, are they luxury brands? No, I don't think they're there yet, right? And I think in China, people have tried to do things very quickly, and it has worked very well for the past, 30 years. But in a way, I mean, often the luxury brand will be right, it's a heritage. I mean, you need to be patient and working on it, and it's over decades that's going to happen. And in a way here, the culture maybe is not as patient on business, and I think that probably stops them. But then again, I mean, China, you wish to be accomplishing everything. You wish to be number one in everything, and somehow they're going to keep on trying. That's for sure. Well, maybe some countries may just give up on that, but they'll keep up. But definitely, just to end on few things, I think it's time for brands, European brands that they have already a global strategy around circularity, around sustainability. It's time to bring it to China. I think it's time to give it a try, because if you don't bring it anyway, the government and legislation will come very soon. So it's better to be ready, to be ahead, because the day that the authorities will tell you, look, here are the new legislation, you may not have the time to turn around. So I think that's key to get started today. And by the way, the consumers, the young consumers you are trying to reach out to, they are increasingly keen on that. So I think that's the way to go. But obviously, some of the action may be a little different. Involving technology is definitely the way to go. Innovation, here they love it. They adapt it very quickly. And a bit of fun. I think the kind of the ecotainment, we could call it, I think should be a winner in China.
Amazing. I mean, I would have been so pleased to continue this amazing conversation, because both of you just bring so much insight and you have such an experience of this market. So first of all, I just would like to thank you. We have not been able to introduce more in detail Luxurynsight, but I invite you, to connect with Jonathan and get in touch with Dominique to learn more about Rethink Fashion. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks for joining us, Dominique from Shanghai. It was really amazing. Thank you very much.
Happy to be here.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you.